Russia's deadline to surrender has come and gone, but Mariupol remains resolute. Over 400,000 people are trapped in the southeastern city, many without access to food, water, or electricity. Some argue Russia has begun waging a war of attrition. So can Ukraine save its strategic port? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the siege of Mariupol. Well, Russia had offered to open humanitarian corridors at 9 a.m. on Monday if Ukraine surrendered Mariupol. Instead, residents of the city chose to hunker down in basements and whatever shelter they could find, determined not to capitulate. Estimates say as much as 90% of Mariupol's buildings have been either damaged or destroyed by Russian shelling. Most parts of the city are under Russian control, but others are holding out. Russia's defense ministry is blaming Ukrainian nationalists for the humanitarian disaster, claiming it had evacuated about 60,000 civilians in the past 3 days. Mariupol's city council says they were forcefully taken to Russia. Well, Greece's consul general in Mariupol was the last EU diplomat to evacuate the besieged city. He described the staggering destruction and called on the global community to push for an immediate ceasefire.
What I saw, I hope no one will ever see, and unfortunately cannot be justified by my conscience, which is happening at this moment in Ukraine. I say it with sadness. What is happening is a tragedy for the Russian and Ukrainian people. It is a wound that will be difficult to heal.
And on Sunday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke in similar terms and said the horrors of the Mariupol siege will be remembered for centuries.
The blockade of Mariupol will go down in history for its war crimes. What the occupiers have done will be remembered for centuries to come. And the more Ukrainians tell the world about it, the more support we find. The more Russia uses terror against Ukraine, the worse the consequences for it.
Well, regardless of how history remembers this moment, Russian forces continue their attack, pushing toward Mariupol from largely two axes: down toward the south from the Donbass and upwards from the Crimean Peninsula. Both these regions are Russian strongholds, and Russian troops and artillery positions are well entrenched and well supplied. So while we have an idea of how Russia is behaving on the military front, other tactics are less clear. Moscow says it's been rescuing and evacuating Mariupol's residents to safety in Russia, but Ukraine's Commissioner for Human Rights says Russia has forcibly displaced the city's residents, even accusing them of kidnapping civilians and taking them to concentration and prisoner camps in Russia. Joining me now to discuss the siege of Mariupol and the greater conflict in Ukraine are from Kyiv, Professor of Comparative Politics at Kyiv-Mohyla University, Olexiy Haran. From Moscow, Director of the Institute of Political Studies and former member of the Russian Parliament, Sergey Markov. And from Loughborough in the UK, lecturer in history and international relations, Paul Maddrell at Loughborough University. Thanks all so much for being with us. Sergey, I'm going to start with you because you cite these statistics that Mariupol is 90%, you've said, pro-Russia, and that Russia can justify its actions by saying it's rooting out, dangerous anti-Russian Ukrainian nationalists whom Moscow equates with Nazis, actually. Most agree, however, that those nationalists exist only on the fringes. So how is it strategic to assault an entire city of pro-Russian people because of fringe elements there?
I've been in Mariupol many times, and Mariupol really for 90% pro-Russian. Mariupol uprisal against Kyiv junta, which took power as a result of the overthrowing of democratic elected president 2014, and this uprisal had been suppressed by a neo-Nazi from Azov. About neo-Nazis, not only our opinion, they have symbols on their uniform, which is Nazi symbol, and even U.S. congressman sent special letter to the head of State Department asking not to give American budget money to the Azov because they are neo-Nazis. So it's very clearly. And this war is not war of 20th century. It's war of the 21st century. That's why they are fighting for the image of victim. And the Kyiv regime are fighting for the image of victim. It's their strategic way to win this war. And that's why Kyiv regime interesting about as much civilians in Mariupol as possible.
Okay.
That's why neo-Nazis from Azov use civilians as human shield. And it's their military tactic to use civilians as human shield.
Okay, but still, I'm trying to understand, if this city is vast majority Russian, pro-Russian, you say 90%, why does it serve Russian interests to bomb the city to pieces? The infrastructure has been destroyed. Physically, the city is in shambles now. How does that serve Russia's interest in any way?
Russians, people should be liberated. And if you say neo-Nazi who are acting as terrorists with tactical human shield, it's impossible to liberate people from terrorists without using military force. And the population of Mariupol is very high. It's almost half of the million people. And Russian attack against neo-Nazi in Mariupol, very, very careful. That's why it's taking so long time. Russian army, not American army, we're just bombing everybody. But Russian tried to save a life of civilians as much as possible.
Okay.
That's why Russian operation taking so many days.
Okay, I will have to turn to Kyiv now to get Olexiy's response as a Ukrainian and as a member of the resistance, effectively. I mean, Olexiy, is any of what Sergey says is any of what Sergey says true? And do you think Putin, by doing this, is actually increasing anti-Russian sentiment, not just in Mariupol, but across Ukraine?
Well, you are right, definitely. What Putin is doing is totally counterproductive to all Russian national interests, and everything which Mr. Markov said is Goebbels-type line, not lie, Nazi propaganda from Russia. Everything is crazy. You know, first of all, most of inhabitants of Mariupol are Ukrainians, but they mostly are Russian speakers. That's correct. But what Russia did in Kharkiv, what Russia is doing now in Mariupol, they are bombarding Russian-speaking cities. They transformed them into Aleppo in Syria, like Grozny in Chechnya. So, and you are right. If you are saying that the people are that they are Russian and they would like to join Russia, so why do you need to bombard all these people? I would like you to show the videos of heavy bombardments of the shelters. And around this shelter, there is a sign. It's theater. It's theater place in Mariupol. There was a sign in Russian, Дети, children. So Russian pilots could easily see it from above, from the air. Nevertheless, yes, you are showing it right now. Nevertheless, they bombarded this place, as many other places, like maternity house, children's hospital, swimming pools, which served as shelters for civilians. Russia is doing war crimes, crazy and bloody war crimes.
Okay. I have to turn to Paul. I'm sorry for the delay. I did see you had a comment earlier. Do go ahead.
This is simple ethnic cleansing. I want to disagree with what Professor Markov is saying. One, he says there's some kind of military justification for it. There is none. Two, he's trying to distinguish this war from 20th century wars. This is a straightforward 20th century war being waged in the 21st century. It is identical to what happened to Grozny in the First Chechen War. It is identical to what happened to Dubrovnik in the Bosnian Wars. And the aim is ethnic cleansing. The aim is to prepare by destroying Ukrainian resistance. The aim is to prepare Mariupol as part of eastern Ukraine for dismemberment from Ukraine. What the Russian regime is now preparing is the dismemberment of Ukraine and the incorporation of eastern Ukraine into Russia on the model of Crimea. There is no military justification for this, and the military campaign has been a disaster for Russia, both militarily and politically. But what is taking place here is identical to the ethnic cleansing of Serbs from Croatia during the Bosnian War, the Yugoslav wars of 1992 through to 1999, the clearing out of the Serbian population from Croatia. It's identical to that kind of ethnic cleansing, and the aim is to create a Russian Eastern Ukraine. This is political, not military. The terror violence being waged against Mariupol has a very crude military justification. This is basically political, and of course the antecedents go further back to the German conquest of Poland in 1939.
I'd like to speak further about that in just a second, but Sergey, let me just get your response to Paul's analysis there.
I already mentioned, I'm sure that both of my colleagues know very well that population of Mariupol are very much pro-Russia. It was pro-Russian during all these years and it stayed to be. I think both of them taking part in military propaganda. And this explains how to explain the contradiction. Why so many civilians? My explanation is very easy. Because they are pro-Russian, and everybody knows that they are pro-Russian. Russian army very much not interesting about casualty of civilians. But Kyiv regime and Zelensky personally doesn't allow civilians to leave to the direction of Russia. But they want to go to the direction of Russia. And also neo-Nazis want to withdraw from Mariupol. But Kyiv regime doesn't want to allow them to withdraw. They want them to continue. They want Mariupol to be a symbol of Russia as a barbarian country which doing war crime. But we, Russian side, want Mariupol stop fighting as soon as possible.
Sergey, I do have to ask you, though, because so many comparisons have been made. Paul just made one we've heard before with World War II. People are now saying Putin's behavior and what happened in World War II, they're similar to each other, especially Hitler going after, for example, protecting ethnic Germans in Sudetenland in the Czech Republic. They say that is exactly what Russia is doing now. Why is that not correct, in your opinion? Because we hear this over and over.
It's not correct because defending of some ethnic groups it's not something bad if it had been used by Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler also constructed good automobile railroads. It doesn't mean that we should be against construction of good automobile highways.
But the reason they make that comparison is because not only did Hitler go into Sudetenland and Poland on the same grounds, but then did not stop at that point. That's what people are saying Putin's problem is now. If they cede anything in Ukraine to him, he won't stop. Moscow won't stop.
What is the difference? In Germany, not as Germany, we have an awful terroristic regime. And in Poland and Czech Republic, we have some kind of semi-democracies with some protection of human rights. But it's exactly what happened in the case of Ukraine and Russia. In Russia, we respected human rights of the people. That's why we have many languages for possibility use. Even in Crimea, Ukrainian language is second official language in Crimea, but Russian language have been prohibited. Nevertheless, 90%, not 80, something 70% of the people in Ukraine prefer to use Russian language. It's very good effect that we have a repressive regime in Ukraine. We suppress that by force, trying to make anti-Russia from the Ukraine. And this is direct threat to Russia.
Okay, let me ask Olexiy about that, because others as well have said that Ukraine does deal with extremist elements and that there is discrimination against the Russian ethnic minority in certain parts. For example, not allowing... Majority. In parts, yes, majority as well. Fair enough. But that, it didn't do Ukraine any favors, for example, to not allow dual nationality, Russian-Ukrainian nationality. Russian nationality was banned if you want to stay in Ukraine or stay Ukrainian. The language was also marginalized in many cases. So the question is, could Kiev potentially rein in those Ukrainian nationalist elements to better de-escalate this conflict? Perhaps that could be part even of the negotiation process going forward, because it's not in Ukraine's interest either to have more extremist elements on its territory.
Frankly speaking, I'm offended by the line of argument which you are using right now, because you are repeating crazy statements from Russia.
I just want you to give the counter argument, please, because this is what Russia says.
I am offended because Russia is saying crazy things, and you know pretty well that Russia is not democracy at all. Russia is dictatorship with no freedom of speech. And Mr. Markov cannot criticize his president at all, because if he dared to criticize his president, he would be fired. Moreover, I would like to say that Russians are not in majority in Ukraine, though we know Russian language. I am originally a Russian speaker. My mother is speaking Russian language. And I may say in Russian, Sergey, ну ты ж брехло просто. You are a liar. You are a liar. I can say it in Russian. We can communicate in Russian. And I may curse Sergey in Russian. And many Ukrainian women, including from Mariupol, they are cursing Putin and such people as Sergey in the Russian language. They are saying, Russian liberators, who called you here? Освободители хреновы. Sorry to say that. So basically, you shouldn't listen to what Russia is saying, because again, this is Nazi type propaganda. Look at this Z. You are showing now video with Z. This is a symbol of Russian aggression. Doesn't it look like swastika? We call it zwastika through Z. Basically, regimes that you have in Russia, which is totally totalitarian right now, which closed Facebook, which closed Twitter, which closed Instagram, and now is going to close YouTube. How can we call this regime? So, frankly speaking, it's not even necessary to rebut what Russians are saying.
Okay.
Because they are saying crazy lie. And you are showing now how Russians are defending Russian-speaking population in Mariupol.
Right. Let me just get Paul's sentiment on the exchange you've heard there. Sergey, if I can come right back to you, Sergey, I will give you your final words, please. But let me get Paul. He's been waiting to comment. Go ahead.
Let me agree with what's just been said. Everything Professor Markov says is false and misleading. There are linguistic tensions in all European countries. Like, for example, let's take Catalonia, or the Basque country in Spain. The Basques speak their own language. The Catalans speak their own language. But France isn't invading Spain to protect them. There is no linguistic tensions do not justify war. There was no discrimination taking place against the Russians that would ever have justified an invasion. Linguistic tensions are perfectly normal. I'm in the United Kingdom. The Welsh speak Welsh. But Ireland isn't invading our country to protect the Welsh. There are linguistic tensions which can be dealt with, can be satisfied simply by a measure of autonomy, which is what Catalonia has in Spain. It is perfectly normal to give a region its own language, allow them to speak their own language, and to give them a degree of political autonomy. That's perfectly normal, and that's what Spain does. And of course, that's what's done in other European countries. That's what's done. It's done in the United Kingdom. The Welsh, of course, have their own government and they can speak their own language. Wales is bilingual. That does just not justify war. And in the second place, that's the first point I would make. The second point that I would make is the fact that there are so many Russian speakers in the Ukraine is owing to the crimes and repression of the Soviet regime. It's the Soviet regime that starved 3.6 million Ukrainians to death between 1932 and 1933. And it's because so many millions of Ukrainian peasants were starved to death that Russians had to be moved in to man the new industries of Ukraine as the workforce. That's why there are so many Russian speakers in Ukraine. It's because the Russians have dominated Ukraine.
Okay.
But that has naturally produced a Ukrainian national movement. So there is nothing in what has taken place in Ukraine which would ever justify war or the dismemberment of Ukraine by a Russian invasion.
Okay.
That is simple cruelty, and it comes on top of the many other cruelties that the Ukrainians have suffered at the Russians' hands.
Sergey, those are powerful analogies and a lot of history. How can you respond to that?
First of all, very easily, I can say directly that I am openly disagree with Vladimir Putin when he suggested Mrs. Nabiullina now the position of the head of central bank, one of the most influential positions, understand. I am clear disagree with Vladimir Putin on this issue. And you can check either I will be in Russian prison or not. And you can check very easily that Russia is a free country and when criticize Vladimir Putin very openly. And secondly, about very important issue about the language, and not only. And I should correct Paul. Please go to read history textbook, and you will find that Soviet government conducted not policy of de-Ukrainization and Russification, but on contrary, many decades, Soviet government conducted the policy of Ukrainization of those territories. Before this, most of the people speak Russian, and Soviet government want just to split Russian nationalism ideology, and that's why it was artificial Ukrainization of those territories. Ukraine, not another nation as Russians.
Okay.
Ukraine is just part of the Russian people. And my last point is about how it's specifically happened. We have not just prohibition of Russian language, which is language majority. We have using terror against those people. And Paul and others close their eyes on the fact that 50,000 of people had been killed by Kyiv repressive regime during previous years, even by figures of United Nations, which is not so big. 50,000 people have been killed, and you close your eyes all this time about tough political repression, about not just prohibition of Russian language, but about killing of 50,000 people.
Okay.
It was the war which Russia now wants to stop.
It's absolutely remarkable, the divide between both, the analysis of both historic and current events on this panel coming from either side. But Oleksiy, I'm going to turn to you. We're down to our last minutes. I want to bring this back to the siege of Mariupol as per our program today. Where do you see Mariupol now in both the near and distant future? Do you think the Ukrainian resistance can hold up to this siege?
Well, we don't know what would happen with Mariupol exactly, because Russians are barbarians, what they're doing. So, but even if we lose Mariupol, we will win the victory in this war, because we are defending our country. And by the way, you showed a wonderful video, and it was written in Russian. Добро пожаловать в ад, господин Markov. Welcome to hell. But it was written in Russian. So I would like to point out to two very important statements made by Russian, I don't know how to say him, how to call him. First, he praised Hitler because Hitler was good in constructing roads. And secondly, he said Ukrainians are not a separate people from Russian. So we are Russian people, which is basically, you know, the Hitler viewpoint, that everybody who lives on this territory doesn't have the right to separate existence. This is the core of the ideology which is imposed by Putin, because these are quotes from Putin. Putin was praising Hitler, and Putin is saying that there are no Ukrainians. So it explains what Russia is doing here. It's not about, you know, confrontation with NATO. It's about, you know, attempt to crush the whole Ukrainian identity. By the way, I think it's very important for you to understand that all Ukrainians are bilingual. So actually we're speaking Ukrainian and Russian, and it's very often when one person is speaking in Ukrainian, the other is answering in Russian. No problem at all. But in both languages, we're cursing Putin and such people who are justifying Russia's aggression against Ukraine, so-called liberators.
Okay, Olexiy Haran, Sergey Markov, and Paul Maddrell, thank you all so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Fascinating discussion. And thanks to our viewers for tuning in as well. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey, and we'll see you next time.